Live from Washington, D.C., this is Balance of Power with Joe Mathieu and Kailey Leinz.
President Trump heads home from the NATO summit with Iran talks now on the calendar. Welcome to the Wednesday edition of Balance of Power as the president flies back to the U.S., where the focus now shifts back to his big, beautiful bill. I'm Joe Mathieu alongside Kailey Leinz in Washington. We thank you for joining us. Kailey, it's interesting as we turn back to what's happening on Capitol Hill. There is a great concern that this is starting to slide. They might not make their July 4 deadline.
Yeah, the deadline, of course, of July 4th being when the president would like to sign this massive legislative package. That would mean not only does it have to get through the Senate, but repass the House of Representatives. And both things are very much in question in terms of timeline. The parliamentarian has yet to finish its work, decide what actually can be in the bill. We haven't seen the text yet of the finance package in full because the parliamentarian's still working through those measures. And then you have to put this whole thing back together again. A vote-a-rama was looking like it was the goal this weekend, but I guess many things are still in flux. Jim.
Well, and they've got a Monday recess to look forward to in the Senate. There's a question about whether they even make that, because either way, it would be a working weekend. This still has to go back to the House, Kailey, for it to get to the president's desk by the 4th of July. And we'll see what Bryan Steil thinks about that. We're going to get the view from the other chamber. The Republican from Wisconsin will join us coming up here on Bloomberg.
Yeah, knowing that a handful of his colleagues, specifically from high-tax blue states that happen to be Republicans holding on to seats in those states, met with Treasury officials and Scott Bessent, the Treasury Secretary, today to talk specifically about SALT as they try to figure out if they can get a deal that keeps them happy while also keeping senators who do not care about SALT whatsoever happy as well.
We're never getting rid of this story. It's the gift that keeps giving, I guess, for Bloomberg, although at some point they're going to have to settle on a number. We'll see what Bryan Steil thinks ahead.
Indeed, we will. First, though, we begin with a check on the markets, as always, and for that we turn to Amy Morris in Washington, D.C. Hey, Amy.
Hey, Kailey. Shell is denying a Wall Street Journal report that it's in active talks about acquiring its London-based oil rival, BP. A Shell spokesperson telling Bloomberg, quote, "This is further market speculation. No talks are taking place." Speculation was growing that the embattled company, BP, would become a takeover target, although its size and complexity would make any deal challenging. Bloomberg reported in May Shell had been studying the merits of a takeover but was waiting for further stock and oil price declines before deciding whether to pursue a bid. U.S. shares of Shell now less than 1% lower. U.S. shares of BP more than 1.5% higher. We do check markets for you all day long here at Bloomberg. The S&P 500 is flat. NASDAQ is up 52 points. The Dow now down 134 points. The 10-year Treasury yield at 4.3% and the 2-year yield at 3.79%. BlackBerry shares 15% higher after the software company boosted its revenue forecast for the full year. Analysts were positive about the company's forecast and hiked their price target on the stock. Reddit shares more than 2% higher, now up more than 60% off its April low. RBC Capital Markets wrote that it wouldn't be surprised to see momentum for Reddit turn it into a strong earnings report. Investors have been sounding more positive on the stock. And Bumble plans to reduce its global workforce by about 240 roles. That represents about 30% of the company. Bumble also boosted its adjusted EBITDA guidance for the second quarter. The guidance beat the average analyst estimate, so now shares of Bumble about 23% higher. For on-demand news 24 hours a day, subscribe to Bloomberg News Now wherever you get your podcasts. I'm Amy Morris. That's a Bloomberg Business Flash. Let's go back to Balance of Power with Joe Mathieu and Kailey Leinz.
All right, Amy Morris, thank you so much. Here with us in Washington, where President Trump, of course, is en route back to, having just attended the NATO summit at The Hague in the Netherlands, where he held an extensive press conference earlier today, having had all NATO countries except Spain agree to increase their defense spending target to 5% of GDP, a major victory for President Trump, something that he was pushing for. But he, of course, took the time to tout another thing he sees as a victory, which is the ceasefire that as of right now is still holding between Israel and Iran, and what he maintains was the U.S.'s total obliteration of Iran's nuclear facilities with the weekend strikes, though, of course, he's pushing back against early intelligence reports that suggest that may not have been the case in terms of total obliteration. But let's listen to the words from President Trump himself as to how he characterized the end, he says, of what he's describing as the 12-day war.
Now this incredible exercise of American strength has paved the way for peace with the historic ceasefire agreement late Monday, and we call it the 12-day war. Spoke to a few people. I guess that just sounded like the right name. It was a 12-day war. And we think it's over. I don't think they're going to be going back at each other. I don't think so.
We think it's over. Answering, I guess, some questions about what appeared to be the fragility of this ceasefire. Bloomberg's Tyler Kendall, Washington correspondent, has been following along with the president's travels and joins us now here in studio. It is 100 degrees on the north lawn of the White House, Tyler. I'm glad you could be with us here. Speak to the fragility of this ceasefire or not, knowing that apparently we have talks scheduled with Iran next week.
Right. So as you heard President Trump, he said that he thinks that the war is over, but we have to keep in mind both sides haven't signed any sort of long-term negotiated agreement here. And that's going to be one of the things that we're watching for going forward if there is going to be some sort of sustained agreement. Now, President Trump did say that the U.S. will have talks with Iran next week, but we do not know who will be involved in those talks, and we didn't get any details about whether or not those are going to be direct or indirect talks. But I pulled one of his quotes. He said, "I don't care if we have an agreement or not. What we want is no nuclear." So if we take the president's argument that these strikes did enough to deter Iran's nuclear program, he is suggesting that he's not too in a hurry to resume the spoken negotiations.
Yeah, I wonder what you talk about then if the objective at the end of those talks is not some kind of agreement. If
Especially
he thinks
since we were bombing them 4 days ago.
Unnecessary. Yeah, we have a lot of questions about that, Tyler. But of course, we weren't expecting that it was the Middle East that was going to feature as a top priority item on the president's trip to the Netherlands for this NATO summit. You would have thought that it would be much more about Russia and Ukraine and NATO as an alliance and defense spending, though we did hear about that today as well.
Right. Well, President Trump really did try to tout this visit as a win because he did get that pledge of 5% GDP from these NATO allies, except, of course, as you had mentioned, Spain does seem to be the outlier here, though in a statement afterwards, they did try to downplay President Trump's comments against them. We should say this 5% total, 3.5% is core defense. That's what we traditionally think of when it comes to defense spending. But perhaps there might be a little bit of leeway here because it does account for about 1.5% in additional investments, whether or not that would be infrastructure or something like cybersecurity. And I spoke with this with Joe in last hour on this program, but it's pretty remarkable because our analysts at Bloomberg Economics have already crunched the numbers. We have to keep in mind that this pledge comes at a time when a lot of European countries are already grappling with some pretty high levels of public debt. And they found that in order to finance this, the spending would add $4.6 trillion to debt piles in the next 10 years. So that's sort of the economic backdrop to what President Trump really is touting as a win here because he has long called for these countries to boost their defense spending.
Fascinating. President's on the way back. What's he doing when he gets home? Is it all about the big, beautiful bill? Does he make a visit to the Hill this week?
I think that could be in the pipeline. We know that the Treasury Secretary was on the Hill yesterday. He was meeting with the so-called SALT caucus today because at the moment, as you both know, the Senate bill doesn't have enough votes to pass that chamber, and they have to get it done maybe by this weekend in order for it to be kicked back to the House and on the president's desk by next Friday.
All right. Bloomberg's Tyler Kendall, Washington correspondent, here with us in our D.C. studio. Thank you so much. And as we consider the prospects for that one big, beautiful bill, the president's legislative agenda, we go live now to Capitol Hill, where Republican Congressman Bryan Steil of Wisconsin is joining us. He's chair of the House Administration Committee, also sits on the Financial Services Committee, where he's the chair of the subcommittee on digital assets. Congressman, welcome back to Bloomberg TV and radio. I'm sure you and your colleagues are trying your best to keep up with how this is proceeding in the Senate, which seems to be not as quickly as everyone had initially hoped. Are you expecting that you're going to have to forfeit your July 4th holiday?
I'd like to keep us in town until we get the task done. I think all of us want to see the one big, beautiful bill signed into law by President Trump by July 4th. But the reason for that is we need to really get the U.S. economy growing again. How do we do that? Making these tax cuts that were originally put into place in 2017 permanent, making the energy reforms that are in the bill into law, and making sure we continue to build on the success of securing the U.S.-Mexico border. And so it's positive news. The Senate is moving forward. The Senate's a little slow, but the Senate's making progress. And it puts us in a position to get this all the way across the line.
What do you make of this whole SALT controversy or debate at this point? Congressman, you already went through it in the House. You guys hammered it out. The Ways and Means Committee said 30. The final deal was $40,000 up from 10, which the New York and New Jersey, California delegations were pretty happy about. Your colleague Mike Lawler spoke with us about it. Congressman Lolota and others who are very happy to be able to bring this home to their constituents. The Senate doesn't see it this way, and so we're renewing this whole conversation. Apparently, we're going to go through this all over again. What do your constituents, what do the people at the Deer Camp bar tonight think about helping New Yorkers subsidize their taxes?
It's a little early for deer season, but I'll talk to you about the fishing camp. I think at the end of the day, what we don't want to do is be subsidizing inefficient states in local government. You can just look at who came out of the Democratic primary for mayor in New York, recognizing when tax costs go up, we don't want to see the federal government subsidizing that. So I'm on the side of bringing the SALT deduction down. That said, there was a negotiation put in place in the House. $40,000 was the agreed upon amount. Not everyone got everything they wanted in the House version of the One Big Beautiful Bill. Now the Senate is having their chance to have a conversation on this exact same topic. We're going to look to see what the Senate gets out, and at the end of the day, we have to have a bill that passes both the House and the Senate. I'm on the side I'd like to bring the SALT tax deduction down, but no one is going to have their way unilaterally.
Well, and obviously bringing the SALT deduction down is one way to bring down the total price tag of this package. Congressman, there is a very real chance that what comes out of the Senate is heftier in terms of price tag than what you and your colleagues passed in the House. Are we still going to be able to call it fiscally responsible legislation once the Senate's done?
Well, we had a problem, I know, at the birdbath as it relates to some of the cost savings on some critical programs to make sure that they're focused in on those that they were truly designed for. That's true in SNAP benefits, in some other areas. As it relates to the tax benefits, I think putting in place additional pro-growth tax policies is actually a win for the American public at the end of the day. And so there's two aspects of this. There's one is the cost savings from the spending side. There's frustration that the Senate rules didn't allow some of those provisions to be brought into the final package. On the tax side, we need to make sure that we are keeping in place those tax cuts from 2017, making them permanent. And the reason for that is because that's what is going to drive forward economic growth. And it's economic growth that will actually generate larger tax revenues in the future, in the same way that we saw tax revenues actually increase going into the pandemic after the implementation of the 2017 tax cuts.
Yeah. Well, let's assume your colleagues in the Senate get their work done here in the next couple of days. Congressman, maybe you're hearing something you can tell us about there in terms of the cadence in the Senate, although I know it's a bit difficult to predict. There are a lot of headlines out there that the Senate is about to jam the House, and I'm sure you love reading those. What's really about to happen? I guess there won't be a conference committee. What happens when that legislation comes back your way?
Well, the Senate is really building on the House product, and so I don't view this as the Senate being in a position to jam the House. The Senate is making adjustments and amendments to a House product. So it origined in the House. I think that's a positive thing. When these adjustments come back, it'll be an opportunity for us to most likely have an up or down vote. Overall, like I said, no one's going to get 100% of what they want in this legislation. The question of the vote is going to be, does the bill at its core move the country in the right direction? I believe the House version did, and I'm optimistic I'll be able to reach the same conclusion when the Senate bill is finalized.
I'd like to ask you about another subject area in which the House and Senate are going to have to figure out how to align themselves, Congressman, knowing you chair the subcommittee on digital assets. The Senate obviously passed the Genius Act stablecoin legislation last week. They would like to see that passed as a standalone measure in the House as well, though I know the committee is considering combining it with market structure legislation. And we had the chance to speak with Republican Senator Bill Hagerty of Tennessee, who, of course, championed that legislation in the Senate, about the idea of combining these two things yesterday. This is what he told us, sir, and we'll have you respond.
It's going to be complicated here because of two committees that have to be involved in this, and it's going to take more time. I think my advice to everybody would be, let's take the win now, let's build momentum, and then let's dedicate our time to going further as market structure and other opportunities present themselves. But right now, timing is critical for a number of reasons. We want to get this started, we want to get this moving, and again, open up this new market for digital assets.
So, Congressman, like we originally were discussing with reconciliation, one bill or two, do you still maintain that this should be one bill, not two?
Strategically, I think we're actually all aligned. The president wants to actually see three pieces of crypto legislation on his desk. before the August recess. That's stablecoin market structure legislation and blocking a CBDC being developed at the Fed. As it relates to the first two bills, we need to make sure that we stay focused strategically on getting both of those passed and across the line. The House has been hard at work at market structure, even passing a market structure bill last Congress, garnering over 70 Democratic votes on the House floor. The Senate, encouragingly, has begun engaging in this debate very recently. It's positive that we're seeing movement in the Senate in that regard, but I think at the end of the day, the tactical decision needs to be made based on how we get both bills across the line and signed into law.
So you're open to passing a standalone stablecoin bill or sending that to the president's desk without, in fact, marrying these two together?
I want to make sure that the plan ends with both bills being signed into law. The Senate often is slow, as we've discussed before, on a whole host of topics and legislation. I want to make sure that we are moving both bills to signature to the president as fast as we can and taking an opportunity here with the momentum that's being built on in the Senate by the passage of the Genius Act to make sure that both pieces of legislation are signed into law by President Trump before the August recess.
Well, that covers us on your chairmanship of the Digital Assets Subcommittee, sir, but you also, of course, chair the House Committee on Administration, which puts you in the conversations around security for members in the aftermath of the shootings of those Minnesota state lawmakers earlier this month, knowing there is also a live conversation around risks of potential terrorism here at home in the aftermath of the U.S.'s attacks on Iran. What do we need to know about the conversation that is being had currently about making sure our elected representatives are secure inside the Capitol and beyond it?
As chairman of administration, I've continued to have conversations with a large number of individuals to make sure that we keep not only members and their families safe, but we keep staff and visitors safe as well. Here on Capitol Hill, we're in a reasonably good position. The United States Capitol Police have an incredibly difficult job of keeping Capitol Hill open and accessible to the American public while keeping it safe. Back home in members' districts, sometimes there is a unique challenge. It's brought to light by the horrific events that occurred in the state of Minnesota last weekend. And so what we're doing is reevaluating the security positions that we have to make sure that members and their families are safe in their home districts. It's essential that everyone not only feels safe, but is safe. And that's incredibly important at a period of time of heightened political rhetoric and some of the security challenges that we face globally right now.
Well, that's fascinating, Congressman. Should this be a case-by-case situation when it comes to applying these resources? Or if you're a member of Congress, do you get a security detail?
The best way to handle the security measure is a risk-based analysis, not to do it in a blanket one-size-fits-all approach, but to make sure that we are meeting the needs. There's a number of resources that are already available on Capitol Hill to make sure not only, again, that members, but also staff and visitors are safe. We need to make sure that people are taking advantage of those, making sure that they're doing the work to protect themselves, and to make sure that we do have the abundance of resources to make sure that we are doing everything we can to keep individuals safe. At a period of time with heightened rhetoric, with some of the geopolitical challenges that we have across the globe, it's of paramount importance that we're maintaining and protecting our democracy by protecting those individuals that step up to serve the country.
It's good to have you back, Congressman. Bryan Steil, the Republican from Wisconsin's 1st District, chairman of the committee, indeed, on House administration. Good to have you back on Bloomberg TV and radio. Kailey, we need to turn to geopolitics as well. As the president returns home to deal with the very matters we were just discussing with Bryan Steil and reconciliation, he's leaving a NATO summit. And apparently, Iran talks on the calendar for next week. We just have no details on that. To think that we've come this far from striking that country in a matter of days is amazing.
Yeah, no details on who will be attending those talks or what the intended outcome is. As President Trump suggested, some kind of diplomatic agreement on the nuclear program may not be necessary. We'll have more with our political panel ahead here on Bloomberg.
And make sure to subscribe to the Balance of Power podcast. Go to Apple, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts and subscribe to hear our full conversation with Congressman Bryan Steil. You can listen anytime at Bloomberg.com.
We continue to keep an eye on all things politics, both domestic and geopolitics. Of course, President Trump is doing the same as he makes his way back from The Hague in the Netherlands, where he attended the NATO summit. He's on Air Force One, which, as we've learned and certainly saw on display yesterday, happens to be one of his favorite times to post on Truth Social on a number of subjects. Just a few minutes ago aboard the aircraft, President Trump tweeting about the U.S.'s what he calls obliteration of Iran's nuclear sites over this past weekend. He says the following, quote, Israel just stated that the nuclear sites were obliterated. Thank you to our great B-2 pilots and all others involved, doubling down on this obliteration language after, of course, the leaking yesterday of early reports from the Pentagon's own intelligence suggestions that said that the preliminary read was that the U.S. actually had only set Iran's nuclear program back by a few months. That is something that today, Joe, while at the NATO summit and again on social media, the president has pushed back strongly against.
Despite some mixed messages earlier at the NATO summit, when you actually read through what he said, insisting the program had been set back decades, not forever, that Fordo was all collapsed, then he went on to acknowledge the intelligence, this is a quote, was very inconclusive. We don't know, he said. It could have been very severe. So I guess that's correct, but I think we can take away that we don't know. So this is something that's still rattling around his mind here, and I guess he's got some reinforcement from officials in Israel. We wanted to play this to the panel along with the full-on reaction at this NATO summit to what just took place between Israel, Iran, and the U.S. Bloomberg Politics contributor Jeanne Zaino is with us, Democratic analyst and, of course, senior democracy fellow with the Center for the Study of the Presidency in Congress, and Republican strategist Ashley Davis with S3 Group, partner with us as well. It's great to have both of you back for our conversation. Ashley, what do you make of this? You spent enough time in the national security space. You've had a security clearance. You understand the sensitivity of this information, and the administration is telling us that these reports from the likes of the New York Times, Washington Post, CNN, about the intelligence telling us something other than the nuclear program was obliterated. Is this half-baked? Is it preliminary? How should we read it?
Yes, absolutely, Joe. And as you would expect, this one gets my blood boiling because I'm so happy that the FBI is investigating who leaked this information, because talking about something that could hurt our national security is, it's just unbelievable that this is where some of these people are and that they're working for our government. But there's 17 other areas of the intelligence community that are also reviewing what happened in Iran, and this is one of the 17. So we have 16 more, definitely preliminary information. But it's frustrating me. Sorry, I'm getting a little my temper's coming out, because it's like our U.S. military had just done an unbelievable campaign with no American soldiers getting hurt, with the strongest military in the world over a country that has been sponsoring terrorism for decades, with death to Americans, death to America. And we are having a conversation about some sort of intelligence that's not even 100% baked about if this is 2 weeks, 2 months, or 5 years of how pushed back that they are in regards to making a nuclear weapon. We're not taking the success of what we should have, and it is the fact that after years and decades of us trying to negotiate with this regime, it has never worked. The president did say he was going to do this, and he did it. And now he's trying to broker a peace deal. And that's what we should be concentrating on more than anything. And thanking our military.
Well, but the military was also involved in this assessment, Ashley. It was Central Command and their damage report that the Pentagon's intelligence operation is relying on this early assessment. Is it also just as bad to push back on our intelligence gathering apparatus and those who are actually trying to make sure that they get an accurate assessment of what they were really able to accomplish?
So what happens normally is the 17 different parts of the intelligence world come together, and our allies, such as Israel, will come together to make one report. And so all these 17 different areas of intelligence do their own part. Yes, this is one part of the DoD, 100%, and I agree with that. So whatever they came out with, they don't have the full picture of all the other intelligence that we use. So it's just, but listen, I get it. I mean, this has become a political thing more than anything. And so it's what especially the Democrats are kind of pushing on.
What do you think of this conversation, Jeanne? I know we've been in it for a couple of days now, and you've been part of it here every day on Balance of Power. The president suggests that questioning the veracity of the intelligence or the result of the strike as a disrespect to the pilots who put their lives in danger to conduct this mission. Is he right?
No, he's absolutely wrong. And listen, I don't want Ashley's blood to boil any more than it is. So sorry to say that.
It's okay, Jeannie. I love you.
Thank you. Ditto. The reality, though, is that the administration had an objective, and that was to denuclearize Iran for as long as possible. And we understand the reports that have come out are preliminary. Obviously, Ashley's absolutely right about that. We need to wait and see what those assessments are. But even in the best case scenario, if their nuclear infrastructure was obliterated, there isn't a international intelligence operative out there or any scholar who has looked at this who hasn't said Iran cannot rebuild this. And so the reality is the objective to denuclearize, is it best to do it via bombing like we did, or was it best to try to negotiate so we could get people on the ground to see how they're doing? The president chose the former. He chose to bomb. And now he is terribly frustrated by the reality that Iran will rebuild. It doesn't matter if they go to the negotiating table or not. In fact, he has given every country out there who's looking at Libya, looking at Ukraine, looking now at Iran. What are they all saying? My gosh, I better rush and do what North Korea did and get myself a bomb however I can, because that is the only way I'm going to defend myself. And so this has worked at counter purposes. The president doesn't want to acknowledge that. He doesn't like to be challenged. But the reality is, whether they obliterated it or not, Iran retains the ability to rebuild. And no matter who is in power, regime change or not, they will do that. Why did he blow up the nuclear deal from 2018 and now try to reestablish it? He's got a lot of answer to. He doesn't want to do that.
We had some headlines crossing a few minutes ago, Ashley, from Axios, which is reporting that the president is going to start limiting sharing classified information with Congress as a result of the leak of this preliminary assessment that we were just discussing. Axios citing sources familiar with the matter in that reporting, knowing that there were members of Congress, specifically in the Gang of Eight, who typically would have been read into a strike like this before it happened, that were not, in fact. Do you view that as an appropriate response? Should we really be cutting off the information sharing with one of the co-equal branches of government?
I mean, I think I didn't see the Axios article yet, but I do think that that could be a slippery slope. But I also do understand the fact that and this happened under President Biden as well, and President Obama and President Bush. There is a concern with the leaking that happens in our country, and obviously it puts people's. Remember what happened with the Scooter Libby days under George Bush. I mean, that puts people's lives in danger if things are leaked. So I don't know how much they're going to curtail people's ability for classified information, but I would think that that is something that Congress will push back on.
It is kind of ironic, Jeannie, that a lot of this seems to be stemming from the Signal chat scandal that involved the Secretary of Defense, Pete Hegseth. When we've had Republican lawmakers on the air to talk about this, they've really highlighted, and the administration has as well, the fact that this mission over Iran did not leak, that the secrecy in itself was part of the success. And they've credited that for not notifying Democrats on Capitol Hill. Where are we going with this?
The reality is the War Powers Act, or resolution rather, of 1973 requires that the president notify Congress within 48 hours. That is the law. He needs to provide a classified briefing. I hope we haven't reached a point in this country where we can't allow the president to do that because we're worried about leaking. If we are, they are absolutely right to investigate these leaks. But in addition to that, I hope we have protections in place for those analysts who used their skills to come up with this analysis that they are not pushed out of their jobs as a result of coming up with facts that don't align with what this White House wants to hear from a PR perspective. So yes, look into the leakers. You need to go to Congress. You need to tell them what is going on. That is the law. But also let's protect these analysts who are there doing their job. And there is a lot of scuttle around that those analysts are under fire right now.
Jeanne, we just have a minute left here, but of course, while the Middle East featured heavily at the NATO summit, it also brought what arguably was a big win for President Trump, and all NATO countries except Spain agreeing to increase their defense spending to 5% of GDP, or at least target that, something he has long been advocating for. What does that say about his ability to influence allies like that?
It is a win for him. It's also a win for the Secretary General. And, you know, Kailey, I didn't get to talk to you about this off the air, but the "who's your daddy" comment was a great comment by the Secretary General. The flattery got him everywhere, and they did get to this point. So it is a big win for the president. Noteworthy, no condemnation of Russia for Ukraine this time around. And the president acknowledging that Putin may go farther was also, I think, a big moment from the summit.
Yeah, the daddy comment did work its way into the press conference. I believe a reporter asked the president if he views NATO allies as being like his children. We'll have to get into that another time. Jeanne, Zaino, and Ashley Davis, our political panel today. Thank you both so much for joining us. And still ahead here on Balance of Power, Joe, we have to talk about what happened in New York City last night.
Unreal.
An upset,
I should say,
in the mayoral primary.
You see this headline that just crossed the terminal? Kind of fascinating. Wall Street preparing for hot commie summer after the blowout in the Democratic primary last night. We'll talk to Don Levy about it coming up next on Bloomberg. We're going to get to the mayoral primary, a blowout last evening and a remarkable result that we're going to explore with Don Levy coming up in just a moment. We do have some headlines on the terminal as we rejoin with Kailey Leinz here in Washington. Not a huge shocker, Kailey. The enhanced supplementary leverage ratio is what we're talking about. Don't worry, there will not be a pop quiz. The Federal Reserve planning to roll it back. The SLR, which applies to the big U.S. banks, Kailey, we're talking about capital requirements and a reduction in that level.
Yeah, this isn't all too surprising. Actually, the Fed chair was in his second day of testimony on Capitol Hill today before the Senate Banking Committee and did tell the committee that they were going to put out something on SLR for comment today, knowing that what they have proposed here, which is reducing the capital requirement for the largest U.S. banks from 5% to 3.5% to 4.5% range, and from 6% to 3.5% and 4% for their banking subsidiaries, is now going to be open to comment. And I would imagine there's going to be a lot of input from relevant parties over the 60-day comment period. So it very well could change, but still this is a step the Fed is looking to take to effectively, as we heard Chairman Powell characterize today, do something that would free up more capital for banks.
That's right. Did he have less fun or more fun on the Senate side after the House?
I'm not sure he ever has fun in any
Neither of
these
them looked
hearings.
enjoyable, I have to admit. Yeah, it has concluded, by the way, if you were watching that a little earlier on Bloomberg TV. I don't think Andrew Cuomo is having fun either this morning, although it's unclear exactly what his political fortunes are. What we can tell you is, despite the conversations you heard on this program yesterday, that it was Andrew Cuomo's race to lose. Well, I guess that was true in part because he lost the race in a remarkable blowout in the Democratic primary in New York. Here he was from last night.
Tonight was not our night. Tonight was Assemblyman Mamdani's night, and he put together a great campaign. I called him, I congratulated him, I applaud him sincerely for his effort, and let's give him a round of applause.
Yes, indeed. His rival, Cuomo's that is, Zohran Mamdani, won the primary, at least unofficially, knowing that New York does use a ranked choice voting system. It will be about a week before the final result is actually tallied. But in the first round of ranked voting, it was Mamdani that garnered 43.5% of the vote to Cuomo's just 36.4%. Mamdani, of course, identifying as a democratic socialist, has some pretty strong ideas of how to improve affordability in New York City. So for more on his prospects in the general and how we should be viewing this from New York City is Laura Nahmias, who is our New York City and state reporter here at Bloomberg. So Laura, obviously Mamdani was relatively unknown until semi-recently, used social media to propagate these ideas like freezing rent, free childcare, city-owned grocery stores. How should we think about the way in which he's going to be pitching those ideas as he moves forward as, at this point, the presumptive Democratic nominee for mayor?
Well, at this point, I think he is thinking about how he can pitch himself for the general election, because unlike in previous election cycles in New York, where the Democratic primary winner is the presumptive winner overall because of the overwhelming Democratic voter enrollment advantage, in New York City, Mamdani is likely going to have to face a competitive general election in November. So he still needs to win another very big contest. And that may mean reaching out and trying to appeal to some of the people who didn't vote for him and who, frankly, might be feeling a little afraid of what he represents and what he might be able to do as mayor. So he hasn't said anything yet about that, but we'll be looking to see what he does say.
33 years old, as Kailey mentioned, self-identified Democratic socialist from Queens. Let's hear from Mamdani from last night. Listen.
Tonight, we made history. An hour ago, I spoke with Andrew Cuomo about the need to bring this city together. We have won because New Yorkers have stood up for a city they can afford.
Echoing the words of Nelson Mandela, it always seems impossible until it's done. Laura, what does a platform of free buses, city-run grocery stores, free child care, rent freezes, and wealth taxes mean in a general election?
Well, I think the important thing to note, and as we have written, is that some of what he's proposing would be paid for by things that he can't do unilaterally. The mayor of New York City has very little power to affect tax increases unilaterally, basically none, actually. So he's proposing to pay for things like free buses and for universal child care through two mechanisms, an increase in the income tax, a 2% increase in the income tax on people earning over $1 million, and an increase in the corporate tax rate at the state level. Both of those things would have to be enacted by Albany and signed by Governor Kathy Hochul. She has already signaled that she won't sign that. And there's been some resistance to increasing taxes in Albany amid fears of exodus of the base of taxpayers who help pay for a significant amount of the services that people enjoy in New York. So it's a question of what he can actually affect. Some things are a little bit easier for him to do. He does have power over the Rent Guidelines Board, which controls rent increases in rent-stabilized and rent-controlled apartments, but not market-rate apartments. He can't freeze the rent for everyone, of course. And city-owned grocery stores is potentially logistically difficult, but and could face some significant opposition from labor unions, but is not totally impossible.
She's so good at this. Laura Nahmias, we thank you so much, Laura, for all your insights in all of our shows this week. Bloomberg, New York City, and state reporter on this day after the primary. We wanted to spend some time with Don Levy, not only because he understands the contours of the electorate in New York, but he's the preeminent pollster in America and understands the challenges of ranked choice voting. How are we so far off in understanding where this was going? Siena College Research Institute Director, who we got to know real well in the 24 campaign, Don Levy, back with us on Bloomberg TV and radio. Don, it's great to see you. Is ranked choice the nightmare of a pollster?
Well, certainly between ranked choice and a primary, that's a tough one for pollsters. The consensus of the polls as we approached primary day was that Andrew Cuomo would carry the election day. And if you added up all the various polls coming in, it looked like a 6, 7, 8 point perhaps win for Cuomo on election day that was going to tighten as we saw ranked choices. Quite a few of the lesser supported candidates, including, say, Brad Lander, had cross-endorsed Mamdani, and it looked as though it was going to get very, very tight when we moved on to the 6th, 7th round of ranked choice. But that's not what happened. Mamdani had incredible momentum. That was starting to show itself in some of the polling. In fact, one poll had it as close as Cuomo only up by 2 points on election day, but it ended up flipping. And Mamdani carried that incredible momentum and an enormous turnout amongst young voters who have previously never voted in a New York City mayoral primary. So the momentum certainly was with Mamdani, and Cuomo's numbers really never moved. He was consensus had him at about 38 points amongst election day voters. He ended up at about 36. He never widened his base at all, and Mamdani ended up picking up support from the lesser candidates and on his own. So really a shocking victory for a candidate that 2 months ago, when we last polled it, was little known to many New Yorkers.
Well, as you refer to the lesser candidates that Mamdani was able to pick up, the cross endorsement of Bryan was really something. He, of course, got third in the first round of ranked choice voting, but he also had some choice words, shall we say, for Andrew Cuomo in the aftermath. This is him last night.
Andrew Cuomo is in the past. He is not the present or future of New York City. Good riddance.
Wow.
Second day in a row, we've had to bleep the words of a politician on this program. Don, it was the president of the United States yesterday. But to the idea of this being good riddance for Andrew Cuomo, it's not necessarily. He's floated the idea of running in the general as an independent. Would the results from yesterday, though, suggest that he stands any real shot if he tries again?
Well, I can never attempt to climb into the mind of the former governor of the state of New York. It's 4 years ago that he left office in a level of disgrace. This was an attempt at his comeback. He's going to have to make a decision. And right now it appears, with the current mayor of New York City, Eric Adams, on the ballot, that Cuomo and Adams might be competing for the same voters. These would be voters who do not feel as though Mamdani has the requisite experience, that he's too far left of some New Yorkers. There, of course, have been accusations of anti-Semitism against Mamdani. So there's a lane available for another candidate. It seems highly unlikely that there's a lane available for two candidates, both Cuomo and Adams. It'll be really interesting to see if indeed one of them decides to bow out. At this point, it really does look as though Adams is in. Cuomo's going to have to make a decision.
Really interesting, Don. So the idea of a four-way general seems less likely as we talk to you more. You're, of course, on Bloomberg, and we're talking in part to the investment community here. Up with a story on our terminal today. Wall Street decries hot commie summer after Mamdani surprise. What is the conversation on Wall Street? What are they saying at lunch today on the Upper East Side as well?
Well, certainly they're shocked. And I think in your lead-in, you certainly showed that Mamdani does not have the power to do some of the things that he's talking about in terms of raising taxes, in terms of finding a way to perhaps frighten some of our Wall Street friends to pay for the ideas that he is campaigning on in New York. So there might be some New Yorkers on Wall Street who are discounting Mamdani and saying that he'll learn. It's one thing to, as Cuomo called him, be a messenger. It's something else entirely to be the mayor of New York City. So it's going to be a wild ride here over the near future in New York City, unanticipated. And I think you also raised this idea that there's going to have to be a complicated relationship between the governor of the state of New York, Kathy Hochul, and the mayor of New York City, if indeed it ends up being Mamdani. That right now they don't seem to be operating on the same policy playbook.
Well, to say nothing of the potential relationship or adversarial relationship we might see outright between a Mayor Mamdani and a President Trump, if that's what we end up with, Don. So in our final moment with you, how should we be thinking about what just happened in New York City and what it might signal for the Democratic Party as a whole on a national scale?
Well, we're certainly seeing a battle. We saw the White House already come out with statements denigrating Mamdani, saying that this is somehow indicative of the immigration crisis that they're trying to address nationally. We've already seen Elise Stefanik, who's campaigning against Kathy Hochul, putting out a fundraiser attacking Mamdani and saying that this shows that the Democrats have completely lost their way and are out of touch with America. So all these currents are going to be taking place. I think it's too early to tell what it says about the general Democratic Party writ large. except to the point that there are in crisis. There's a turmoil within the Democratic Party that the old guard is being pushed aside to some degree, but the extreme left wing doesn't appear likely to be able to capture the national attention. New York is one thing, a primary in New York is one thing, the United States is something different.
All right, Don Levy of Siena College, thank you so much for joining us. And we should note Michael Bloomberg did endorse Andrew Cuomo in that primary. He is the founder and majority owner of the parent company of this network. We'll see you again later on Bloomberg TV and radio.
And with that in mind, we urge you to subscribe to the Balance of Power podcast. A lot of great conversations today. You can find us at Apple, Spotify, wherever you do your podcasts. Subscribe and listen anytime at Bloomberg.com.